there was a problem that immediately emerged for this picture of this benevolent pro-U.S. military government that was being installed. And that is that 2 Americans were killed in the first week and a half after the coup. And these 2 Americans were leftists. They were anti-war activists. They had been involved in activities in Chile that were, some of them were overtly political. They were also involved in a newsletter which was overtly pro-Allende and overtly anti-war, for example, anti-Vietnam War, and very critical of the United States. So 2 American opponents of U.S. policy are killed, are disappeared. And one of them, his body was not, they didn't know where he was. It turns out that he had been in the morgue all along. So the U.S. is confronted with, well, 2 Americans have been killed. What about that? The U.S. response to that was, well, we don't know who killed them. The Chileans, we asked the Chileans, and they said, well, we didn't kill them, but there's a lot of leftists who are running around, some of them wearing uniforms of the military. And so we think that that's what happened, that that leftists wearing army uniforms detained these people and killed them and dumped their bodies in the streets. And this absurd story, for anybody on the ground at the time, its absurdity is obvious, was the version of events that was defended by the United States. And moreover, in a document that I obtained from not from the U.S. declassified documents, but from the archives of the Foreign Ministry of Chile, is a note from the embassy to the Foreign Ministry saying it is our honor to inform the military government that no persons have been given asylum in the U.S. Embassy. So they were making it clear to the new government that we haven't given asylum to anybody. In the context in which all of the European governments, all of the Latin American governments, most of the Latin American governments, were crowding their chanceries, their main buildings, and all of their outbuildings. They were filling them with people seeking protection and giving them asylum. The United Nations came in and set up safe houses together with the Catholic Church, so that all of these foreigners, there were approximately, I estimated about 20,000 foreigners who would have been targets for this roundup of foreigners. They have a safe place to go, and then they can get safe conduct to get out of the country safely. And as I said, 800 were rounded up and put in prison, and about 50 were killed. But for the United States, proud that they had not given protection to anybody, and a source of mine who was in the embassy at the time said that he knew that on the day of the coup that Americans came to the embassy and to the consulate and asked for protection and were turned away. He said, I know that's controversial, but I was there and I know it happened. And then 2 Americans show up dead. And so the U.S. Adopts the Chilean alibi, which was patently false. And this, of course, is the subject of my most recent book, which is coming out now. It's the story of Frank Teruggi and Charles Horman. And the story, as it unfolds, is the U.S. in this uncomfortable position of dealing with trying to justify the violence, trying to play it down, trying to say that it's necessary but it's going to end soon, and at the same time the Chileans are stonewalling about what happened to these 2 Americans. And for, in one case, Frank Teruggi, his body he was killed, he was at the stadium, and and was executed, dumped in the street. His body shows up at the morgue, and it was identified the next day from fingerprints because he had a Chilean identity card, as I did and most of the Americans who had a visa. So his body was identified right away, and so within a week, it was clear what had happened to him. The U.S. and the Chileans are still saying, well, we don't know who killed him. The other person, Charles Horman, this is the subject of the movie Missing, which is a very important movie in the early 80s with Jack Lemmon and Sissy Spacek about the father's attempt to find his son. The body, he also had been taken to the estadio, interrogated, and killed within less than 24 hours. His body was taken to the morgue, but unlike what happened to Frank Teruggi, they successfully hid his identity for a month. And I was able to establish that this was not accidental, that there were at least 3 or 4 requests by the embassy to check fingerprints of bodies that had not yet been identified, against eventually not just against the carnets, the identity cards in the Chilean files, but they brought his fingerprints from the United States because he'd been a member of the National Guard, so there were fingerprint records of him. And they presented those to the Chileans. Please check this. Oh yeah, we checked them. Nothing happened. A total lie. I was able to establish from records that I found through a Chilean court case that somebody from the foreign ministry had told the morgue not to reveal the identity, even though the identity was at that point was being known. So it was a cover-up. It was an attempt to delay the identity of this person. His father had come down to Chile, and his wife was there. They were desperately looking all over the city, going to all the hospitals, asking for the U.S. to help, and the U.S. was always, well, we've asked the Chileans, and they say that we didn't do anything with them, and they had contradictory stories. Oh, well, they straightened that out. Now, it was a totally bogus cover story by the Chileans, but the U.S. had to continue this facade that, well, we don't know what happened, because otherwise they would have to admit that the Chileans, their allies, had killed 2 American citizens. The United States did not recognize that the Chilean military killed these 2 Americans until after the return to democracy in 1990.